Every ticket gone. The Foro Italico sold out, overwhelmed, overrun. And Alex Eala hadn't touched the clay yet. Boris Becker stood inside the broadcast booth at the Italian Open and looked at the figures in front of him. Then he looked again, because nothing in 4 decades of professional tennis had given him a framework for what the data was showing. A 20-year-old from the Philippines, ranked 42nd in the world, carrying a 2-3 record on clay this season, walking into a draw so loaded it made experienced professionals uneasy, and she had produced the kind of ticket frenzy Rome normally reserves for its champions. Its icons. The legends who have made this red dirt their cathedral. No Grand Slam title. No WTA 1000 trophy. Just a name. Just a presence. Just a phenomenon that the sport's most accomplished voices have been reaching for words to describe ever since Miami split the Tennis World Open 14 months ago. And when the Foro Italico came alive around her, Boris Becker said something that stopped the room. Stay with this until the end, because what he said and what it signals for women's tennis will change the way you see this sport. There is a particular quality to the silence that descends over the Foro Italico just before a tournament begins. A collective held breath. An ancient stillness that belongs specifically to grounds where champions have competed for nearly a century. The red clay feels different here. The Roman light strikes the surface at an angle that makes the ochre courts glow like something sacred. The stone pillars, the marble figures, the long sweep of the Tiber visible just beyond the grounds, all of it combines to tell every arriving player exactly where they are. Inside one of the most storied sporting venues on Earth. Alex Eala arrived in Rome in the first week of May 2026 as a 20-year-old ranked 42nd in the world, carrying 12 months of relentless accumulation since the Miami Open announced her name to a global audience. That intervening year had been dense with meaning. A WTA 125 title in Guadalajara in September 2025, the first Filipino player ever to claim that distinction. A U.S. Open victory over Clara Tauson in August 2025, the first match win by a Filipino in Grand Slam competition during the Open era, a moment that generated front-page coverage across Southeast Asia and 30 seconds of unplanned silence from a New York crowd that had just watched history being made. A 2026 Australian Open debut that became something beautiful and chaotic simultaneously when the queues outside Court 6 in Melbourne extended back toward the shadow of Rod Laver Arena itself, with thousands of Filipino supporters unable to enter a venue designed for 10,000 spectators, not an entire nation's worth of devotion. She arrived in Rome with a 16-11 win-loss record for the 2026 season and $565,000 in prize money already accumulated. She arrived having just picked up 2 ranking positions despite a second-round exit at the Madrid Open, a defeat to 19th seed Elise Mertens that stung, but drew from her one of the most revealing quotes of her professional evolution. When asked how she approaches opponents who are physically stronger and more powerful, Eala answered with a clarity that told you exactly how her mind works. You could argue that everything I do is to prepare for those players. I'm still getting stronger, still developing more power, but I have other strengths too. Not just power. Different layers to my game. Different layers. That phrase lodged itself in the thinking of every analyst and commentator who heard it because it wasn't describing a game plan. It was describing a philosophy. The understanding that power is one instrument in a much larger orchestra, and that the player who learns to conduct all of it, rather than simply turn up the volume on the loudest part, holds the most durable advantage. She arrived in Rome carrying all of that. And she arrived knowing something that the Foro Italico, the Italian Open organization, and Boris Becker inside the broadcast facility were only just discovering. The Filipinos were already there. Hundreds of them, scattered through the streets of Rome, positioned outside the tournament gates hours before a single ticket window had opened. Philippine flags draped across shoulders. Banners hand-painted in Tagalog. Eala's name written across the backs of supporters in a city where tennis crowds had historically rooted for clay court royalty from Italy, Spain, and Eastern Europe. She had said it herself 12 months earlier, during her 2025 Italian Open debut. She hadn't expected such a significant Filipino community in Rome. Just walking the streets, she had run into compatriots 5 times already. You know, she said, when you're seeing another Filipino, It's a blessing to have such a community behind you. If that was a surprise in 2025, what greeted her in 2026 was something of an entirely different order. What happened at the ticket windows on the morning before her first match is something tournament officials are still trying to fully process. Here is what unfolded. The operational machinery of the Foro Italico runs on nearly 8 decades of institutional knowledge. The Italian Open has hosted the greatest players in the history of this sport. Its organizational infrastructure has managed the full scale of Federer's global following, Nadal's decade of dominance across 10 titles, Serena Williams at her most commanding, Sharapova's popularity at its absolute height. This is a tournament that understands crowds, that has seen what genuine tennis hysteria looks like up close. And still, what happened next caught them completely off guard. Nothing in that accumulated institutional knowledge had prepared them for Eala. On the morning before her first-round match against Poland's Magdalena Frech, world number 45, a former top 22 player, a genuine clay court threat despite arriving on the back of a 5-match losing streak, the ticket availability for the court assigned to host the match read 0. Not scarce. Not limited.
0.
Every allocation had been consumed before the Roman sun had fully cleared the stone skyline above the Foro Italico. The speed of the sellout didn't merely surprise the people running the tournament. It undermined scheduling assumptions that had been locked in weeks earlier. Court assignments had been distributed according to projected demand, standard operating procedure for any WTA event. That standard procedure had failed, comprehensively and visibly, to account for a phenomenon that had been developing in plain sight for 14 months. The clearest warning had come from Melbourne in January. Thousands of Filipino supporters had ascended on Melbourne Park, creating gridlock outside Court 6 and a queue that wound several hundred meters through the grounds during Eala's Australian Open debut. The court held roughly 1,000 spectators. Demand exceeded that figure by multiples that tournament staff, by multiple accounts, had neither anticipated nor prepared any contingency to manage. The pattern had surfaced again in Abu Dhabi in February. Former Australian number 1 Daria Gavrilova, watching from her broadcasting position, described what she observed without any softening. "You can tell from the crowd numbers whether Eala is playing or not," she said. "The Filipinos are showing up for their girl, and she loved it." Then she added something that every scheduling director on the WTA circuit should have taken seriously. If she were a tournament director, she said, she would do everything possible to have Eala at her event, and she would make sure Eala was on court every day, singles and doubles, because the supporters come for Eala and then stay for the rest of the tennis. Sports journalist Ben Rothenberg, covering the Australian Open from the Melbourne Park grounds, put a question to his audience that captured precisely what was unfolding. He asked, in earnest, whether Alex Eala might already be the most popular player in women's tennis. At the Foro Italico on this Tuesday morning in May 2026, that question had answered itself. The answer stood in the queues, in the sold-out notifications, in the clusters of Filipino supporters gathered outside closed gates, phones raised, hunting for live streams, determined to follow every point of an Eala match even from beyond the venue's physical boundary. Inside the broadcast facility, Boris Becker, 6-time Grand Slam champion, 3-time Wimbledon winner, one of the most analytically sharp voices in tennis commentary, had just been handed the attendance figures. Those present described the expression on his face as something rarely seen on a man who has spent a lifetime being difficult to surprise. The 2026 Italian Open draw was not merely hard for Alex Eala. It was the specific variety of hard that makes experienced analysts reach past the word challenging and search for something more honest. Her first-round opponent, Frech of Poland, world number 45, a player who had reached a career high of 22nd in November 2024, with victories over Emma Navarro and Mira Andreeva, both ranked inside the top 10 when those results were recorded. Dangerous on clay. Currently on a 5-match losing skid, which in the particular arithmetic of professional tennis makes her precisely the kind of opponent most likely to rediscover her sharpest tennis against a player whose crowd support could ignite something combustible. Beyond Frech, a potential second-round examination from 31st seed Wang Xinyu. Then, if Eala advanced that far, an entirely credible third-round collision with Eala Rome, the 2026 Australian Open champion, world number 3, whose serve and backhand constitute arguably the most technically imposing combination currently operating on the WTA Tour. And beyond Rybakina, Marta Kostyuk in the 4th round, the same Kostyuk who had dismantled Eala 6-1 in the 2025 Italian Open first round. The quarter-final landscape included Madison Keys and Alina Svitolina. The semi-final picture featured Iga Swiatek, Jessica Pegula, and Karolina Machova. The final potentially Sabalenka, Gauff, Paolini, or Andreeva. By any fair reading, this was a brutal architectural construction through which an unseeded player ranked 42nd in the world would need 7 consecutive victories over opponents capable of ending her run at any given moment. One tennis outlet called it a nightmare draw for Eala. That description was accurate about the difficulty, but it missed something fundamental about how she processes that kind of adversity. Her entire professional existence has been assembled against structural disadvantage. She walked into Miami 2025 as a wild card ranked 140th and defeated a French Open champion, an Australian Open champion, and the world number 2 in succession. She won matches no algorithm had modeled. She performed under atmospheric pressure that would destabilize players ranked 50 positions above her. She arrived in Rome with a 16-11 record for 2026, $565,000 in accumulated prize money, and the full knowledge that every match she plays now carries the weight of an entire nation watching every single point.